Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of the various domains. The topic of today's session is Harnessing the Power of Project Management in E-Governance. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Piyush Gupta, Senior General Manager, Capacity Building and Knowledge Management at National Institute for Smart Government, that is NISG. Mr. Piyush Gupta is currently working in the role of Senior General Manager, NISG. His competency areas include strategy planning and implementation level institutional capacity building, change management in e-government projects, certified training needs, analysis expert, e-government, project assessment, and program management. He is also a speaker and faculty at various institutions and forums in India and outside. Piyush, in his present role at NISG, is involved in strategic planning and managing large capacity building initiatives under the National E-Governance Plan of Government of India. He is the architect of e-governance workshop involving more than 250 political leaders across state governments in India. He is also instrumental to bring a full-time one-year e-governance educational program through reputed management institutes like the IIM Indore and TAPMI Manipal. Piyush has developed the framework for e-governance and capacity building roadmap that was used for all the states in India. He has been associated with the e-governance for the last 12 years and has a professional experience of 30 years in government, private sector, and as an IT entrepreneur. Piyush is a postgraduate in statistics and management and has submitted his PhD thesis on e-government project assessment under the discipline of management science. He has also edited 4 books on case studies in e-governance in India. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker, Mr. Piyush Gupta. Over to you, Mr. Gupta.
Yeah, thank you very much. A very good afternoon to all of you, and thanks a lot for taking out the time to attend this webinar. I am also thankful to PMI for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I hope I'm audible and all of you can view the presentation.
Yes, Mr. Piyush, you're audible and the presentation is also clear.
Okay. Thank you so much. The topic harnessing the power of project management in e-governance in today's time is more appropriate and relevant across the globe as e-governance is recognized internationally as an enabler for good governance. And at the same time, it's also important for us to note that the successful implementation of e-government projects is challenging and a daunting task. And with this as the background, let's look at the agenda for the webinar today. Today we are going to look at 4 or 5 areas with respect to e-governance and how it is related to project management complexities. First, we'll look at the essence of e-governance. What is e-governance? Then we look at e-governance project lifecycle. All of you are very much, I think a lot of IT people are there on board for this webinar, so you are comfortable with the SDLC and of course the project management lifecycle. But here we try to look at what really is the e-governance lifecycle. And then we look at the project management complexities when we are designing and implementing and managing e-governance projects. What are the type of issues and challenges which come in typically when we are dealing with government as a client? And then we look at the need for capacity building within the government and also looking at how do we build up the capacities outside the government in the industry also in terms of e-governance. And at the end we'll open up for question and answers. Now before I move forward to the next slide, I would like to know more about the people, about the community members who are there connected on this webinar. And there's a poll which I request you to take up, where 2 things which I want to know is, are you a project manager? Second is, are you working in area of e-governance? So if you could take the poll. Yeah, I'll get the numbers. I'm just waiting for those numbers. Yeah, can we have the numbers which have been polled?
People are still voting. Around 73% of the people have voted, and we have the final numbers coming up in a few seconds.
Okay, okay. The idea is just to let me understand in terms of what is the background of the members who are involved, so that we can spend some time on understanding what e-governance is before really getting into the project management related issues and challenges. Yeah.
The results:
So
84% of the
they're still
people,
coming up.
84% of the people said yes, and rest 16% said no.
Yes, in terms of project management, are they
Yes.
project managers?
Yes,
And
84% of the
e-governance?
people are project manager. I would run that poll now.
And e-governance, yes. How many of you are working in area of e-governance or are handling e-governance projects? Yeah, it's coming up.
People are still voting. Around 75% of the people have voted.
Okay. So how many are coming up who are into e-governance at the moment?
Well, we have around 14% people who are into the area of e-governance, and 86%, around 85% said that they're not into this field.
Okay, so then we move forward on this. I think the task is now easier for me because around 15% of the members, they are working in e-governance area, and but at the same time 84% of you are project managers. So your role as project managers when you get into e-governance becomes slightly more critical, and at the same time easy for me to really help you understand what this e-governance is and take you through the issues and challenges and how do we address that. Okay, thank you for the poll. Now we move on to the next part in terms of understanding what are the issues in the Indian context, especially when citizens, whether it's an urban citizen or a farmer or industry who interacts with the government on day-to-day basis or quarterly, monthly basis. Urban citizen normally would interact with the government to avail services, so electricity bill, property tax, income tax related annually, or driving license, and so on and so forth. Whereas a farmer would again interact with government for getting various services like the income certificate, for getting the loans, subsidy, agriculture department interactions, land certificates, and all those things. So this was a study which was done by in 2002 as part of the potential investment, improving investment climate in the country by Govindarajan. It was called Govindarajan Committee, and this looked at that average urban citizen over a period of 1 year interacts 50 times and touches 10 departments. The beauty is it's not only 10 departments located in one place, but these 10 departments are spread across the country and across the state or across the city. So it's not that convenient that he is going to one particular campus and he's getting all the work done. And if you look at farmer, again, he interacts 40 times across 8 maybe different departments, and that's for the industry, and that's much larger business houses. So this was slightly disturbing in terms of so many so much of efforts are spent in terms of number of trips, the cost incurred by the people who stand in the lines, and again, maybe it leads to some level of corruption also, all those issues. So what was looked upon is that how do we improve the productivity? Okay, let me just go to the next slide. I think there's something stuck. Yeah. So the recommendation which came out ultimately was looking at how do we streamline these interactions and enhance the national productivity, and that's how they started talking about a single portal, a single window concept, electronic form of a window or office which is available to citizens and business houses through which they interact. Now, with this, we also look at the growing expectations of the citizens, which is happening across not only in India, across the globe. And as we are moving in the developing economy, the expectations of citizens and businesses from government is increasing. In addition, there would be a lot of external market forces also driving the governments to change their business processes and the way it has been delivering services to its stakeholder. For example, a citizen would really like that the government demonstrates high quality of frontline service. That means the place where the citizen interacts with the government should be congenial, the environment, the people who are interacting, he should be able to get a committed delivery of service. That's where we are looking at the front line. And citizens are also looking at new channels to access the government services. It's not just going to the department between 9 to 5 or 9 to 4 and only on 4 days or 5 days a week. But citizens are expecting different channels. Why can't I access government services sitting at home? Why can't I access 24 hours a day wherever I am, irrespective of the geographical boundaries? So these are the type of expectations which are really coming up and demonstrate better value for money. That is what they are looking at. If they are paying some service charge to the government, so there should be commitment in terms of the delivery and the quality of service. Then also looking at the lower cost and greater efficiency in terms of government's own functioning. So the expectations, if you look at, they are increasing day by day. It's getting into a vicious circle. So let us look at what is e-governance. This is a very simple definition which I am putting up on the slide now. There's I think a few seconds delay. What comes on the webinar? Yeah, it is up now. The definition says that it is the transformation of government to provide efficient, convenient, transparent services to the citizens and businesses through ICT, through information and communication technologies. So the focus, if you look at, are those the colored words which talks about transformation, and efficiency, convenience to the citizen, transparency, and to whom? Citizen and businesses. So the essence is what we call in industry BPR, business process reengineering. In government, we coined a new word, we call it as GPR, government process reengineering. So it's not ICT which is the prime driver for e-governance, but it is the level extent of transformation which one can do in these projects. So that is the real word or principle which drives e-governance as compared to our pure ICT or IT initiatives. Okay. There have been a lot of transformation, good stories in India, and we have seen over years since 2000, we have been looking at lots and lots of initiatives across the state governments, across rural level, through NGOs, through state governments, through industry. It could be in terms of looking at a portal which is available 24 hours for e-procurement. You don't have to go to a department to submit a tender, but sitting at home or your office, wherever you are, irrespective of the geography, the city where the tender is to be submitted, you could really apply that. And going to the rural area, the farmers, they can get a lot of information about farming, about the agriculture use, the mandi rates, what we know very much are available today, and a single point of contact for the citizens in various cities, urban and rural, to avail the services. And you also have a lot of innovations like Infotela, which was done long time back by IIT Kanpur. So a lot of innovations are available, and a lot of these things are happening in the country. And this is what we are looking at from the old systems where we had to stand in line. It's still happening. It's not that it has transformed, but these are very few pockets which is happening across the country. Now, this next slide, it shows about the framework which brings about clearly the connections between good governance and e-governance. And on the left side, if you look at, you have the different stakeholders who interact or get impacted by the services of the government, the citizens, businesses, various government departments, they themselves are the clients of each other, the central government versus the state government themselves, and there could be a lot of other social media and various voluntary organizations. And at the bottom, if you look at, we are these words which talk about transparency, accountability, responsiveness. All these are prime principles of good governance. It's nothing new which we are talking about. But e-governance is something which can really bring about a transformational change and an enabler in terms of making this happen. Okay, I'm just moving to the next slide. It's slow. Yeah. Now, in e-governance, if you look at, there are two interfaces which become very, very critical in our designing of any of these projects. One is the front end, where the citizen interacts with the government, and the second is the back end, where the government processes the application which is delivered or submitted by the citizen, and then accordingly, the processing, after processing the driving license or whatever passport, goes to the front end, and where the delivery happens to the citizens. So these are the two prime interfaces which are very, very important end-to-end. That's what we are talking about. Transformation end-to-end. It's not only we just put computers in the front, but at the back, we still take the same amount of time to process. So it is an integrated effort approach which we are looking at in e-governance. And when we design, you look at four pillars, four critical pillars in the design. The first pillar is the processes. You have to re-engineer, you have to change the old processes, bring in legal amendments. Second pillar talks about people, that is change management. How do you manage the risks? As employees have been, government people have been working for years, so why should I change? Why should I do this? There will be a lot of various intermediaries whose work would be affected. So that's a major component, major part in this whole transformation, handling people. And the third is the technology. How do you look at the scaling up of the technology, security aspect, more and more online services are available, then the security, the risks for getting people, unwanted people onto these online services, the hacking and all those things get into an issue. And the fourth important is in terms of resource. When we talk of how do you sustain the project in terms of the business value, in terms of the business model, the revenue model. So who funds and for how many years? Can these initiatives become self-sustainable? Can they become their own revenue generated initiatives? So how do you make that happen? So these are the four key pillars, and around these four pillars, what we really need to answer in our ultimate design are these four questions. The first is the most important when we talk about what ultimately we want to achieve out of this initiative. And many times we say that we'll put up so many thousands of computers, we'll develop a ERP, we'll develop maybe a COTS or a bespoke model, or we'll put in so much of network connectivity will happen. But these are all what we really look at as outputs. So what is the benefit? What is the net outcome of these initiatives? That has to be very, very clear. Ultimately, the beneficiary is the citizen or the business houses. So how do they get benefited out of this? That is the first question. The third, fourth, and fifth will lead later on. That's not really a challenge. How do you implement? What technology? and all those is not a problem. Resources, you can have a business model, you can have funding, who's responsible for what role. But the prime question is, what do you really want to achieve? And that is one of the biggest challenge to even bring clarity onto that first question. So this is a very high-level framework giving a connection to all of us to understand how we are moving from good governance to e-governance. Okay. Now from here, let me move on to slightly the e-governance context in terms of the national vision. And in India, we have a national e-governance plan. It's called by NeGP. And this is a flagship e-governance program of Government of India approved by the Cabinet in May 2006, and it comprises of around 31 mission mode projects, which are the most important initiatives which cut across the central government, state government, or the local governments, and where there's a large interface with the public, with the business community, or internally within the government itself. So there are 31 mission mode projects, and in addition, the plan also has a related core and common support infrastructure. And if you look at the definition, the vision statement, it's simple, and it brings out all the words which you have been talking about as principles of good governance. We're talking of all government services, locality, his locality, common service outlets. We are talking of let department not work in silos, but let one outlet serve for multiple departments. Okay, so that is where we're looking at. Let's try to synergize, integrate, okay, and at affordable cost. Citizens are happy to make a payment for the services they want to charge, they want to take, provided there's a commitment and quality from the government. Okay. This is another interesting survey, the recent survey which was done from its annual survey done by United Nations, and India's global ranking in this survey, global survey 2012 stands at 125 out of 193 countries. Now that is quite surprising, maybe to some of us. And it's not that. In 2010, we were ranked at 6th, and we have dropped down to 6th in terms of 6th rank. We have dropped down, slipped down to 6th rank. And Korea continues to be leading at rank 1. That is the most interesting part. And this survey is primarily on three people of index. They look at the telecommunication penetration, they look at the human capital, and online service delivery. One of the highlights which comes across this particular survey this year is that they find that a lot of countries, the shift in e-governance is happening by bringing technology to the people instead of people coming to the technology hubs. And we see that very much happening in India, where you can look at the mobile penetration, and mobile is becoming a very big lever to deliver e-governance services in India. But these are there are very few examples which one could really bring about, which are very much visible across the country. To name some of them, like the Indian Railways, which is astonishing transformation, coming from that that cardboard ticket to now no ticket. So you have a mobile, you don't require. So it's a major transformation which we have come across in an initiative like Indian Railways. Apart from that, we have the MCA21, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which is a single window for the companies, and now the companies need not really go to the department at all, and it's mandatory. They have to submit all their files, their returns in the electronic form. So it has taken away the interface, the physical interface, which was one of the bottleneck in delivering of the transparent and corruption-free services to the business houses. And one can definitely look at the mobile penetration which is happening across the rural and urban area. However, at the same time, there are many more e-government projects which have been delayed, abandoned, or in drag mode, but are not visible to public eye. So how do we increase these numbers which are there on the screen? How do we increase these these learnings from these initiatives. If it can happen in railways, why not in another department in the government department? Now, the next slide is slightly interesting, which I feel always motivated to show, and it comes from the IT sector. IT people would have seen this. And here we talk about why the projects fail. Primarily, if you look at the wish list or the scope of work is huge. Okay, so wish list is we want the moon. Okay, but we don't really provide much budget. And in e-governance, when you look at, it's not just buying of computers, setting up infrastructure networks, but it's more than buying of services. And that's where we really need to appreciate the amount of the budget, financial resources, and the time to implement these would be much larger as compared to just buying computers. So ultimately, if you cut down on the budget and time, which is the most important for any of these successes, you might land up into getting a wheelbarrow instead of getting a Rolls Royce or something which you really was dreaming for. So, yeah. Now we move on to looking at what is the e-governance life cycle, project life cycle. Okay. How is it different from our typical SDLC or our typical project life cycle? Now, one of the things which we see in this cycle is that e-governance projects, they look beyond the typical project management phases which we have. Okay. So we have a start and we have an end which comes after implementation. But in e-governance, post-implementation becomes more critical. That is the O&M phase, operation and maintenance, where we are looking at sustainability and enhancements of the existing services and bringing in new services. Okay. So what you see on the screen is the typical 6 phases in terms of steps, you could call them, or phases. And in addition, there are 2 phases which cut across right from the beginning till the complete life of that project. Okay. One is project management itself. The second is change management. Okay. How do you bring in the stakeholders along with you? How do you get their buy-in? How do you not only reduce resistance, but how do you really get their complete buy-in so that they don't really become uncomfortable in moving from the old stage to this new type of government working? Okay. So this is a typical cycle which we follow in any of the e-government projects. And now, if you look at this cycle, then you have around 8 knowledge areas. Okay. We come to the PMBOK 9 areas later on, but here if you categorize what are the type of the knowledge areas which are required in conceptualizing, designing, implementing, and maintaining or managing the e-government projects, you look at these 8 knowledge areas. The project or the program management itself is one very, very important. How do you manage e-government projects which has multiple complexities? We'll talk of these complexities in the subsequent slide. And then you have the stakeholder management. Okay, that is the change management part of it, technology management, procurement management, because we are not procuring only computers, as I said earlier. It's more to do with services. How do you bring in accountability by bringing in the private, the employees from the private sector to man the delivery centers? So that's the larger issue. Resource management, then you talk about the process reform, which you already said. And ultimately, how do you manage the extent of knowledge and learning experience which is generated out of these projects and share those across other initiatives? And the challenge is, how do you bring all these together holistically into our design principles of e-government projects? And that is the real challenge. Where is the capacity for people to understand and get a hold on these 8 knowledge areas? Okay. Looking at the stakeholders, when we talk of stakeholders, we have been talking of primarily citizens and businesses. So you have different categories of, if you look at the canvas of e-governance, we see that projects are intended for different stakeholders, like the citizens, so G2C projects are there, government to citizens. Similarly, for businesses, G2B, then government to government is G2G, and then government to employees, you have G2E. And these projects, managing these projects is always a challenge, especially when projects involve multiple stakeholders with different expectations. Okay, the expectation levels are completely not really the same. And not only that, we get into new and unproven technology, shifting or unclear project requirements, and above all, the constraints of resources, funds is always there. So with all these complexities, the challenge for managing e-government projects become slightly more aggravated, I'll call it, slightly more difficult as compared to pure IT initiative, pure IT project in a private or a public sector. So from here we start looking at some of the challenges which we have seen in terms of project managing e-governance projects in the country. And what I'm sharing right now in 2-3 slides is the learnings which we documented in 2011 when NISG along with PMI and Grant Thornton did a dipstick study on understanding the key issues that are impinging the success of e-governance projects in the country. So the scope of work was one of the biggest high-level challenge which came up as a definition. How do we freeze the scope of work? That is where the key issue in terms of the spillover of the projects really happened. Okay, and because the scope of work is always at a high level, and many of the non-IT components are not planned initially or are missed out, and later on it becomes an issue for the implementing partner to add those as a part of scope of work with no additional cost. Then project execution challenges like measuring service levels, SLAs. It is important that e-government projects, because they are not only procurement of infrastructure but services, as we said. So how do you measure the quality of service? That becomes a challenge for us. How do you define the KPIs, key performance indicators? Okay. Then another one, if you look at the last point, the lack of continuity of project champions. This champions I'm talking about from the government side, who are the owners of the project, that becomes a challenge. Okay. The sign-off given by one government officer may not be accepted by the successor, and that's when we are looking at some of the even the UK or Canadian government challenges, they also have a similar challenge. The transfers of the champions take place, and the successor might not really accept what has been approved or agreed upon by the predecessor. And many times the successor likes to reevaluate even the certification of the work, even the scope of work and contract. So these are some of the prime challenges which came out of the study. And then we look at another challenge. PPP in e-governance projects is one of its kind, first kind, and it is difficult to apprehend the transaction volume based on which the public-private partner will come in and as a partner and deliver the said project along with you. The business model here becomes a challenge. The business model of implementing partner may not give a break-even during the contract tenure if over transactional the volumes which you have estimated are not correct. Okay, and the contracts today which we have in government, they really do not give us sufficient scope of renegotiation in case of unapprehended gains or losses by the partner. Okay, when we talk of PPP, actually we are looking at as a partnership, win-win for the private part sector as well as the government. It's not just outsourcing that you buy the computer and then you are cut off with the private partner. No, it's a joint venture sort of thing, win-win situation. If the government delivers, they'll be happy, and if this particular private partner is able to implement better, of course they'll be able to generate a business out of it. Okay, so it's a win-win situation. And then if the contracts are not designed today, to provide counter guarantees also to reduce the investment risk of the bidders. So what happens if there are delays in the sign-off? So there are no counter guarantees given by the government. It's not possible. That's how the procedures are. And we tend to transfer the risk to the partner. And that itself, what I just said, contradicts the PPP relationship between the two parties, that is the government and the private sector. It's a win-win situation, not just transferring the risk by having a private player. Okay. And let us look at some more challenges which were recommended which came out as a part of that study. Yeah, we are looking at the next slide. The system integrator or the consultant is solely responsible to manage the project timelines, even though delays may be on account of the procedures of the government, okay, like the UAT, okay, sign-offs, various phases of the life cycle. Okay. Normally, there would be a tendency to delay, and that delay is the cause of concern for the private partner because the payments are linked to that. How does the private player put in the resources with no cost or no revenue coming back to them? Okay, and the change of champions or the political shifts could be some other reasons in terms of the delays which normally happen in e-government projects as compared to maybe the other IT projects. Okay, then we also look at mostly projects fail to achieve the intended objectives and outcomes or benefits. This we have already, we were talking of this earlier also. We find it very difficult to define the parameters to measure the benefits. At the end of the implementation, how do you say that my project is successful? It's not successful because I have implemented a software, because I have set up the network, because I have trained my people. No. What are the measurable benefits to the citizens? Are they happy with the new set of services, and how do you measure that? So how do you say I have brought in accountability, I have brought in transparency due to this initiative? So what are the measurable parameters for accountability and transparency? That is what most of the time we fail to define this, and the success or failure becomes subjective depending on who is assessing the initiative. And yes, the lack of resources, dedicated champions and project teams from the department is a challenge. It's always taken as additional work, and e-governance or good governance cannot happen as additional work. It has to be taken as a part of our delivery of the services to our stakeholders as a part of being in the government. Okay. So therefore, the lack of issues of ownership comes in. Okay. Government somehow, if you look at in these initiatives, they are never in control. Okay. This is a statement which we always look at, and there is a too much of dependency on external consultants or the SI. Okay. So how do we build up that internal confidence, ownership, and how does the government come in control? Okay, that's another challenge in these initiatives. Now, these were some of the challenges which I thought I'll try to bring up on board. And if we are to map these around the 9 knowledge areas of the PMBOK, then I think the slide is coming onto your screen. Yeah. So if you look at that, then all these can be mapped onto these 9 knowledge areas in terms of whether it's integration management. Okay, the issue is in terms of silo approach is a challenge. Each department within the same state government is trying to work independently. There's no common architecture. We talk about enterprise architecture in the private sector, but here we lack that particular spirit. Okay, and scope management, of course, that's a major challenge we have been talking about. Time management, we talked about it. Okay, HR, the turnover of the key person getting transferred, that is quite frequent, and inadequate resources who understand project management, who have the knowledge and skills to understand and take and apply project management techniques in e-government is very, very scarce. Quality approach to the quality management, that is lacking. Cost management, delays in payment becomes a concern in these initiatives. If payments are not made in time, how do we move to the next phase of the project? Communications, we are in government, we have too many meetings and too few decisions. How do we address this component? And the risk, yes, want to transfer all the risk to the private sector. So one sided contract that is there. And procurement in terms of management, in terms of vagueness and specifying what we really want. So very clearly, if you look at the challenges which we were talking of in e-governance, they are not really different, and they can very easily be mapped onto the your 9 knowledge areas. And ultimately, what really accounts for, if you look at all these are risks, and I was looking at the yesterday's webinar on risk management, it becomes very, very critical. In fact, more than any other project. Okay, and ultimately it boils down to e-governance delayed is e-governance denied. Okay, so this is very, very important. Otherwise, we ultimately land up into lots and lots of funding, lots of resources being spent, but no outcomes, no benefit to the citizens or the stakeholders. Now I'll take you from here to the US, the learnings, which are, I think, are equally interesting. And over there also, there's no difference in terms of what we are talking and what they are talking in terms of challenges. And this was in 2010 when Vivek Kundra became the US government CIO, and they consolidated and did an intro inspection and found that despite spending more than 600 billion on IT over the past decades, the federal government has achieved little improvements or no productivity improvements at all. And the challenges, issues were the same, what we find here also in our Indian context. IT budget projects run over budget, behind schedule, or fail to deliver the promised functionality. Okay. Second is also interesting. How do you break up the whole project into small chunks? The WBS process, what we normally talk about in project management, rather than waiting for the whole thing to get implemented. How do you break it into small and get quick wins? Okay. How to make the people comfortable? Okay. That's what they were talking of. And of course, federal government too often relies on large custom proprietary, so or shared services exist. So these are the typicals which came up. And so what was the implementation approach which was recommended as a part of this? Okay. Moving to the next slide. Now, they said that they took a very clear call at the federal level. They said only projects, the IT program which follow these norms will be approved. Okay. Number one was have a dedicated program manager right from the beginning, and a fully staffed integrated project team. Okay, so if you are implementing number of projects in the same department or across the state government, so how do you bring in an integrated project team? Use a modular approach with usable functionality delivered every 6 months. So the citizens would be very happy to see something coming out in 6 months, and if some corrective action has to be taken, so those mid-course corrections can be taken easily rather than waiting for 2 years' time. Use specialized IT acquisition professionals. Okay, so you have to use people who are specialized experts from the market. Okay, and drive towards a more balanced set of project and program success matrices. Okay, and holistic outcomes. And then they were also talking about, next slide, strengthen program and project management. Okay, the people managing these programs must represent. Okay, this is a very important line. What goes into their recommendation. The people managing these programs must represent the best of the best, not begin a new program unless the right manager is in place and dedicated to lead it. Okay, and this last is quite interesting in terms of what I'm putting up as its tech stack. That's a wonderful thing which happened. It's the IT dashboard which allows the American people to monitor the cost, schedule, and the CIO rating of every major IT investment in the federal government. And this is something which really maybe sometimes force force the government itself to perform better. Okay, so these are some of the learnings which are very much relevant to us also in India when we are looking at managing e-governance project. Okay. Then we move on to the next slide where we are looking at so what needs to be done. Okay. So what needs to be done? Develop the required capacities in program management and project management within the government and the private sector. Now the major challenge here is the private sector has competencies in project and program management, but there is a lack of domain knowledge understanding in terms of how the government functions. So there has to be a marriage between these two set of knowledge people within the government and the private sector, and then you bring in the best of the breed in terms of the people who understand both these elements. And somehow it can happen when we really build up these capacities within the government primarily rather than just outside the government. Okay. The next slide shows the type of capacities which are required at different levels in terms of the government especially. We are looking at the leadership level, that is at a political level, or it could be at a policy level, okay, and program level and the project level. So there are different level of competencies which one would require in terms of knowledge and skills and the attitudinal part as we move in different layers. It's not that only leadership will drive the project. You have to have capacities at each of these three layers: the leadership level, the program level, and the project level. Okay. So some of the good practices which are very much important and relevant to us in the Indian context, the first and foremost which comes about is establish the project management office, and sometimes we call it as a PMU. In India, normally we call it as a PMBO during the early stages of the project planning. And what should be the type of consortium team structure for this? Next slide shows you as an illustration. Yeah, so it has to be a composite team where you have the domain people, the government people, and the experts dovetailed together as a PMO, and you have the empowered committee which is basically to look at the decision-making strategy level, and you have the system integrator or the private partner who helps in the implementation. So the PMO formation itself becomes very, very important, and this is where the ownership of the government really drives the project rather than the consultant coming in and driving the project. So once you transfer the ownership back to the government, the chances for project management moving in a better, efficient way, they are much higher as compared to not having a composite team. Okay. And then there's some of the more recommendations which we're working at the national level. We are looking at developing a customized and a shared project management framework and tools for e-governance. We do have the PMBOK. It talks about a very detailed processes and methodology to address various challenges and components in the project life cycle. But in e-governance, we have to look at, when we're talking of e-governance project management framework, we have to consider the administrative political leadership and government organizational culture, which are some of the fundamental shift and needs to be incorporated in the project management framework. So we'll have to do this customization and then build up a framework which can be used across the country. Okay. Then we are talking about project tracking tool, okay, to be integrated to the task and activities of the projects instead of having review meetings or maybe coming out with noting sheets in the government, because in government we are very fond of we have to submit everything on paper. But how can you make the tracking tool as your review mechanism even at the top level, whether it's happening at the ministerial level, political level, or at the bureaucracy level, along with the project management team. Okay, and ultimately develop motivated team leaders as nuclei for e-governance initiatives in the country. And for this, we require extensive awareness and training to be imparted across various levels. If you give project management training to only one particular level within the PMO, the other people will not really appreciate, because in government we want the cycle time to move very fast. We want the results to move fast, and we don't want a lot of times we want to skip the methodology, we want to skip the tools and move fast, jump. Okay, so you have to create awareness at all levels related to what we are really talking about as project management as a professional body. Okay, so in view of the increased focus on judicious spending of government finances, decreased availability of public sector funding for such programs, it is imperative that projects are properly planned, executed, controlled, and managed so as to get the desired results in a desired time frame. And for this, definitely, again and again, whether it's the Indian context or the US context or other countries' context, project management is one of the key to really make and deliver better and more efficient e-governance projects in our country. Okay. So with this, I'd like to close my session, and definitely e-governance is not a journey, is a journey, but it's not a destination. So it's an ongoing effort, and all of us being part of the project management community or the IT community have to contribute and see how we can make a difference to the lives of the citizens by being part of these e-governance initiatives. Thank you very much. Over to Moini.
Thanks for the insightful presentation, Mr. Gupta. Let's quickly take up the questions now. Please read out the questions from your chat pane and their answers so that all our users may listen to your commendable insights.
I have not got the questions as yet in my chat box, Moini.
You need to resize your chat window and then you can see the questions. I've already assigned the questions to you.
Okay, okay. No, Moini, I'm not able to. Okay. No, Moini, sorry, I'm not able to see the questions in my chat window.
Did you try to undock your chat pane? Please undock it from the control panel.
Yes, I've undocked it and I've
resized it. Still you cannot see any questions?
No.
Okay, let me just read out the questions for you and then you can answer them.
Yeah, sure.
Well, we have a question from Mr. Pashupati Rangaswamy. He says, what are the career prospects in e-governance? The career prospects in e-government.
Okay. See, it might be surprising for many of the IT professionals that e-governance has opened up absolutely a new phase for the IT industry. And the amount of expenditure or resources which are going to be pumped in, not only by Government of India and state governments, but other funding organizations also is huge. For example, if you look at the National E-Governance Plan itself, there's if all these initiatives which you're talking of, 31 initiatives, they get implemented, so somewhere around 50,000 crore plus of investment will go into implementing this. And for doing this, we require a lot of resources in terms of people outside in the private sector who are consultants to government in e-government projects, but also within the government. And the National E-Governance Plan has, for the first time, in fact, there's a cabinet note as a part of the capacity building scheme. They have approved that the governments can hire private sector people on contract basis for a period of 1 year, 2 year, on market salaries. Okay, and if you look at the experience, if we want 10 people, or maybe 50 people, we are getting one right person, okay, from the open market. So there is a huge opportunity for people to really get into e-governance as a career. And as I shared, Moini shared my profile, we are already, Government of India is already conducting a 1-year course, which is a MBA type course in some of the B schools, which is totally talking about e-governance as a career. Yeah. Thank you. Next question, please.
It's from Ms. Aprajita Lal. She's asking, what is G2C, G2B, G2G, and G2E?
Yeah, G2G, these are categories of projects which are distinguished based on to whom is government serving. So when we say government is serving or delivering services for the citizens, those are categorized as G2C projects. Okay, so when they are typically your passport project, if you look at, okay, so that is passport office delivering services to the citizens. So that's a G2C project. If you look at the MCA 21, which is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and the companies are the clients for the department, that project, MCA 21 project, is a G2B project, okay, government to business. And similarly, government to government, a lot of projects are there which are delivering service from one government department to another government department. Those are all internally within the government, G2G, and then various projects which are meant for the employees. For example, the central the pension project is there. So the pensioners, they can get onto that portal for various type of services which are available to them as a retired employee of the central government. So that will be a typical G2E type project. Yeah, does it answer? I hope. Yeah.
We have another question from Mr. Karthikeyan.
Next question, please.
He says, how do you manage stakeholders in an e-governance project, especially public, since there would be a different opinion across the board? The question says, how to manage stakeholders in an e-governance project.
Correct. So managing stakeholders across the project, that is an exercise which starts right from the beginning when you are trying to conceptualize the project. So if it is a typical G2C project, so let's take the case of the agriculture department. Okay, so the government goes to the farmers and takes up a sample, talk to them, what are their pain areas when they are interacting with the government. So what type of services they would like to take up. Okay, so you have to do a stakeholder consultation at different levels as you are moving. Continue going back to your stakeholders for validating in terms of what you are doing, whether you are moving in the right direction. Ultimately, whatever you are applying in e-government, it is for the stakeholders. It's not that because I want to implement this project, just implement. Whether it's going to be useful or not, I am not worried. Of course, that's another scenario in government, but ultimately it's for the citizen. So you have to continuously engage your stakeholders, whether it is external or internal employees, as a part of your stakeholder and change management process. Thank you. Next question, please, if there's any.
Mr. Ankur Bhalla is asking, stakeholders often do not know exactly what they need during eliciting the requirements. It could be quite challenging. How do we handle them?
Yeah, there would be different methods by which normally we do. If it is, again, I take the same example, agriculture. So you have to look at different groups where you will find these farmers, whether it could be one-to-one, that might be a challenge because they are spread across the state or across the country. So you have to look at which are the bodies also which to which these farmers are linked together. It could be various user associations at a state level or at a district level, or farmer communities would be there. So one has to reach this varied sample of stakeholder bodies, but definitely you have to first give them an open hand. What are their pain areas? You ask them, and from there your project requirements, outcomes, objectives will come out very clearly. You have to spend time. This is an exercise which cannot be done sitting in a room, sitting in a government secretariat, or sitting in your private sector office. You have to go to the field and then talk to them in their place. Okay, if you call them in a seminar type of thing, they won't open up. So you have to go to them, talk to them, and they will open up, and they will definitely give you what are the pain areas and what are the expectations. Okay, so you have to talk to them in non-IT, non-e-governance, in their language. Okay, because ultimately whatever you want to do, again, it has to be for them. Otherwise, there's no purpose. You will come out with some set of services which might not be their priority area. They might be looking for some other services from the agriculture department, but the agriculture department might think that no, the farmers want these services. So there would be a mismatch. So it's important. You have to go and you have to bring in people who understand this aspect of stakeholder consultation. Okay, through surveys, what type of questions, moderated survey, interview-based survey. So there could be different mechanisms, okay, one could use to do this. Yeah. Anything else there?
Yes, we have a question from Mr. Jasbir Bhogal. He says,
Yes.
as mentioned, that at times the successor do not agree with the approval or acceptance criteria or the scope of the work accepted by the predecessor. Does it mean that there is always a risk of scope creep in e-governance project? How would you suggest to manage this?
Yeah, being in looking at from the private sector, yes, there's a definitely great, I'll say, chances that scope creep does take place in e-governance, and that is where if our project management boundaries as a part of project management, we bring those very clearly up front in the beginning, like we have the citizen charter. Okay, so how do we come to an agreement that initially, yes, this is what would be implemented within the next 6 months, as US government is also talking about, and the subsequent changes or additions go into the next part, and we freeze then the next chunk of the scope and get onto the, so that sort of a agile methodology we'll have to really figure out. But yes, this is a challenge, and the project team, the private sector has to be absolutely clear when you are picking up a project to clarify each and every part of the scope of work. And also it's always good, now we always do that, what is not in the scope is also documented as a part of the RFP, the request for proposal, which is there, so that there's no ambiguity tomorrow that okay, this was there or not. But there has to be the call definitely from the private sector to really mitigate this scope creeping. Otherwise, in government, I don't see a fixed tailor-made process or step, a capsule which can be given that scope creep will not happen. Yeah. Next,
we have a question. What is the typical schedule timeline of the e-governance projects?
Okay, this would typically depend on the leadership style of the champion. Now this champion or sponsor, I'm talking of at the policy level, who is typically the person who is going to drive and make this happen. Okay, and we have seen that normally if it is a statewide project, department-wide project, maybe around 6 months time, something can come out as the first phase of delivery. Okay, so you could talk about around 2 months or so in terms of if it is a typical department centric. But if you're talking of the type of MMPs which we are talking about, national integrated, and that cycle could be around, at least overall cycle for the first implementation to take place would be around 2 years, anything between 1 to 2 years of time. But definitely we have seen some of the initiatives at the municipal corporation level or within a particular district level coming out in a period of even 6 to 1 year time. Okay, so it would totally depend on the scope, not in terms of the work alone, but the geographical spread of the implementation. Yes.
Our last question for the day is, since we have a lot of questions, we would not be able to take up all the questions today. So our next question is, can agile methodology be used in e-governance projects?
Definitely, that's what we are saying, that you have to today. Agile methodology is very, very important, and it plays, if you are able to really understand and also create awareness amongst the government in terms of how do you really manage a project in this sort of scenario which is ever changing. And definitely I think that is the answer. It might reduce the risks or the investment put in by the private player as compared to following our other waterfall and all the other typical methodologies. Yeah. Yeah, that's it, Moni. Hello.
Thanks, Mr. Gupta, for your session on harnessing the power of project management in e-governance. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of this webinar will be available on tegig.com by tomorrow. Thank you all for your support.